2, 1.
Good evening and welcome to the April 15th meeting of Troy City Council. I'm Marty Baker, President of Council. I ask everyone to please silence your electronic devices for the duration of the meeting, and I request that council members put their cell phones on silent and put them away until after our meeting adjourns. We'll begin with the invocation by Mr. Bill Lutz, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, in this holiest of weeks, we are reminded that it is written, "Then he told his followers, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Lord, we are constantly reminded of the crosses we bear. We are reminded of the loss of loved ones, loss of employment, loss of certainty. We live in a world of confusion, and too many times we live in a world of pain. But Lord, give us all a sense of compassion and care for one another as we help each other carry our crosses and live into the life of responsibility that you've called us to. And Lord, above all else, we are grateful. We are grateful for those people that serve us, and we are grateful for those that we are able to serve. Lord, be with each and every one of us as we make decisions for our community, and be with each and every one of us in this room as we are called to the higher glory that you have given us. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda?
Here.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Here.
Mr. Heath?
Here.
Mr. Kendall?
Here.
Mr. Sievert?
Present.
Mr. Twist?
Here.
Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Lutz?
Here.
Mr. Swazer?
I'll move to excuse Mr. Swazer. Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Phillips to excuse Mr. Swazer. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer is excused.
Tonight we have a public hearing on Ordinance 012-2019. Mrs. Knight, please read that ordinance.
Ordinance number 012-2019, ordinance changing zoning of in-lot 10858 in the city of Troy, Ohio from the county zoning districts of R1 AAA, one family residential district, and A1 domestic agricultural district to the city zoning of R4 single family residential district.
I now declare this public hearing open. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in favor of the ordinance? Please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
Good evening. I'm Bart Denlinger, 3035 McCaig Road here in Troy, and I am representing the owners, Jane and Don Delcamp, in this rezoning process. I'm also president of 3Gen D Development, and we have a pending contract to purchase this property from the Delcamps. Our reason for the R4 zoning, what we're missing, or what we seem to be missing here in Troy with a lot of the clients that we are working with, is a little smaller scale than what we typically do. Our tendency is to build on larger lots, larger homes, and we're finding that there's a lot of people in this area that don't necessarily want or need the larger lots. They don't need the larger homes. So we've designed a neat little community on this 12 acres to accommodate those clients that are looking for that still very custom home, but just on a smaller scale than what we normally do. They like to have the option of a maintenance-free living, which we're going to provide in this community. And we just feel like with the location near the country club and the access to that, the clientele is just looking for something like this in the city of Troy.
Okay.
I know we've got some concerns with the drainage and of course storm runoff. We've employed one of the most reputable engineering firms in the area that has done several projects here in the city of Troy with Choice One that has evaluated that site, and we're in the process of addressing all those concerns, and with the regulations that we're restricted to during development, with the control of the stormwater, we feel will alleviate any concerns of floodwaters heading off the property. Currently, that whole property does drain towards the east. With the development, we're going to collect about 80% of that water and send that to a detention basin to the north in our preliminary design. And of course, then it'll be released at a controlled rate rather than at an uncontrolled sheet zoning or sheet rate as it is now. We've got a good team to really make this a very special subdivision here in Troy, Ohio. Any questions? I do have Andy Schumann here with Choice One. If there's more technical questions that need to be answered, I'd be happy to bring him up as well.
I will state that after this hearing, next week, this will be going to a committee, and there'll be more discussion at that point. And so a lot of the questions and things come at that meeting. So, okay. Thank you. Anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the ordinance? Anyone in the audience who wishes to speak against the ordinance?
Buster Connor, 1210 South Play Street, Troy, Ohio. My only concern is we're getting more and more people into Troy. I guess Troy likes that. But I would rather see more jobs in Troy along with more people in Troy. We need jobs in Troy. We haven't had any good jobs come into Troy. ConAg's expanded, but I mean, those are established jobs. We need newer jobs. I don't think anybody's even looking for newer jobs. This town needs to look for jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. J.J. Frigge, 1635 Peters Road, Troy. My wife Lisa and I are the property owners to the immediate east of the Del Camp property. And I did provide this afternoon to council via email some information as well as some copies tonight for you. Not planning to go through the entire document, but there's some information there around some of our concerns, and I just wanted to first of all thank the council for the opportunity to address you on this issue. My wife and I are quite concerned about the rezoning and the development of the Del Camp property by Mr. Denlinger and his company. Just as background, we've been aware of this pending development for over a year now, so since about March of last year, 2018. And we did, when we found out about it, we did reach out to Mr. Denlinger in March. And he did come over to our property and walked around with us and heard our concerns. And we thought that was a good start. However, we haven't, at that time, we expressed the concerns, and they're summarized in your packet. I won't go through word for word, but really our key concerns at that time were around the aesthetics and property value and the impact, knowing that these are quite smaller lot sizes, the impact that it could have, not only of our aesthetics, but considering the development will be about 50 feet, 30 to 50 feet right outside our front door. And certainly smaller lot sizes would play into the property value. Really, the impact to nature and wildlife was a concern for us. Certainly, as Mr. Denlinger mentioned, the drainage is a very big concern of ours. As he noted, that entire property does drain to the east, right through our front yard. In your packet, you have some pictures of that drainage in the back. And those aren't, those have been several incidents over the past handful of years. It's not a one-time thing. It's really annually, a couple times a year, we see some pretty significant runoff. Right past our garage and our outbuilding and over our driveway. Next was really around the building density. 22 homes on only about 10.5 acres. If I do the math correctly, and I don't have it noted in here, but I can supply that to you afterwards. If I look at the surrounding lots, our lot is 5.5 acres. The lot to the immediate west, which is Mr. and Mrs. Gilardi, their home is almost 6 acres. To the north, there's 2 properties. The existing new Dr. and Mrs. Delcamp's house is about 6 acres. And then the vacant property to the immediate north is 22 acres. So we have very significant property all around this development, as well as to the south with the first phase of the country club development. Those lots are 15,000 square feet minimum, so R3 if I know my city zoning correctly. This is proposed as R4, which clearly is only 9,000 square foot lots. Again, just based on the math, it's about 450,000 total square feet in that 10.5 acres. If I take 100,000 or so for road construction, that leaves about 350,000 square feet. And I know the current blueprint is for 22 lots, but 350,000 divided by 9,000 is more like 36 to 40 potential lots that would be theoretically zoned to that space. So we're quite concerned that while it's only 22 lots today, which is already too many in our opinion, that it could be even more. And really unclear as to how the Planning Commission determined this to be in accordance with the local area. So would really push back on that point as to why R4 is appropriate. At the time, we also expressed concerns around flooding. I did include in your packet a FEMA floodplain map. Floodplain starts at our property in our backyard, and any water that drains to the north drains to a creek, which then drains to the east through our property. So additional water to the north could have a significant impact on that creek, as well as into our backyard and into the floodplain and beyond to the southeast of the Delcamp property. And then safety is our last concern with 22 homes in this plot, 28 in the first phase. It's quite a bit of obviously a new neighborhood, new homeowners. Again, to the north there is a 22-acre plot of woods and creek, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was people on that property quite routinely. So really, those were the concerns we expressed at the time to Mr. Denlinger. We also followed up with him via text, and he did get back to me right away. We offered to buy a buffer zone along the far east of the Delcamp property, closest to our house, and he denied that basically because at that time, rightfully so, his engineers counseled him that he would need all that area for the drainage and retention and detention plan. So in short, that was all a year ago. The troubling thing to us is that we haven't heard anything from the construction company in that year. And now here we are up for rezoning, and we're not clear at all as to what the plan is, nor how our issues are going to be addressed. So in the meantime, we've done quite a bit of additional research. In your packet, there are several maps and data around just a couple of things that I would highlight. So Miami Soil and Water District did come out to our house for an assessment. They showed in your packet that, again, that entire property does drain to the east right through our front yard, which is obviously very concerning for us. Any worsening of that would probably flood our garage and basement. Next would be Miami Conservancy District, which just notes an article that shows that rainfall in our region has grown consistently and quite significantly over the past 5 to 10 years. We're at about an average 8 inches higher than the 50-year average right now for the past 5 years. And so current building code would require, I believe, the builder to detain and retain and mitigate water to the 50-year rainfall calculations. And that would have been fine 50 years ago, but today we're looking at a much different, much more significant rainfall pattern. So it really needs to be overdeveloped from a water and drainage standpoint. Would be interested in the data and the events that they're using to calculate that drainage and sheet flow. Next would be an assessment completed by the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission, and there's some maps attached that categorize the Delcamp property as low potential for development based on natural environment factors such as surface water proximity, well field protection areas, inundation areas, floodplain impacts, soil drainage, and groundwater pollution. Most concerning for us is the groundwater contamination. The Delcamp property itself on the map is labeled as medium risk, but the neighboring land to the north, which is where some of it drains, and then of course to the east is categorized as high risk. And so with 9 or 10 of those new lots planned to be bordering the north and draining to the north, there's obviously going to be many pesticides, fertilizers, and other contaminants that will go into the creek to the north. And then we are not on city water, we are on a well. We also have a pond, so we're extremely concerned about our groundwater contamination and onto that southeast area towards 25A and Swales Road. Last, there's a report also copied in your packet from the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission finding that the Delcamp property is not suitable for development. This finding took several parameters into consideration, including natural environment factors, which I mentioned, but also built environment factors and land developability measures. This report asserts that the Delcamp property should be classified as already fully developed and indicates that the property is best suited for single residency R1 county zoning or A1 agricultural as it's currently approved. So to summarize, we're now in April of 2019. We're at a public hearing, and we're debating whether to go forward with 22 lots, changing from single-family residence zoning to an R4 0.25 acre zoning. We haven't heard any update to the plan in over a year. We don't feel like any of our concerns or issues have been addressed. In fact, based on our research, we found like there's more reason for concern. We believe that we've gone down the neighborly approach and the fair-minded approach, and honestly, we feel like we just have been pushed off, and none of our concerns have been addressed. Don't really feel like this is how the process is supposed to work. We are the most impacted property in this plan. We think we have valid and fair concerns, and they really need to be addressed. We sincerely hope that the council members will share some or all of our concerns and help ensure that they are addressed before this zoning change is considered for a vote. So we would invite and encourage all of you as council members to visit our property. We'd be happy to walk around and show you in person, firsthand, what our concerns are. And it's certainly, I think it'll be illuminating to see firsthand what this would mean for not only our property but the surrounding properties. So thank you for your time and consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have now or follow up afterwards.
Thank you. Mr. Twiss, this is going to your committee, the Community and Economic Development Committee, for a meeting. Do you have a time set for that meeting?
Yes, it'll be Monday, April 22nd at 5:30
In this location?
at this location.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak against this ordinance? Seeing none, then I declare the public hearing closed. Mrs. Knight, please read a summary of the minutes of the April 1st, 2019 meeting of Troy City Council.
Minutes of Council, April 1. Committee reports. Finance Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing Troy to participate in ODOT's road salt bid. Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing Troy to participate in the 2019 CHIP program partnership agreement with the county, Tip City, and Piqua. Utilities Committee recommended legislation be prepared regarding being involved in moving utility poles off an area of the Great Miami River levee. Resolution number R13, 2019, participate in the ODOT road salt contract, was given first reading and was adopted. Resolution number R14, 2019, participate in the public project year 2019 CHIP program and enter into an agreement, was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R15, 2019, relocate telecommunication lines from the Great Miami River levee, was given first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 012, 2019, a rezoning, was given first reading. Following various comments, council adjourned at 7:34 p.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move we accept the minutes as read.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Twist to accept the minutes. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
We have several committee reports this evening. The first report is from the Buildings Committee and Chairman Mr. Lutz.
Thank you, Madam President. This committee met on April 1 regarding the recommendation of the Board of Park Commissioners that a 1.447-acre parcel containing the house and associated building at 2290 North Troy Sidney Road be declared as surplus and offered for sale. This committee supports the recommendation of the Board of Park Commissioners and recommends that legislation be prepared declaring as surplus and serving no public purpose in Lot 10631, a 1.447 acre containing the house and associated outbuildings at 2290 North Troy Sidney Road, and authorize the Director of Public Service and Safety to offer such parcel for sale. Respectfully submitted, Mrs. Oda, Mr. Phillips, and myself as chairperson.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Lutz. Next report is from the Community and Economic Development Committee and Chairman Mr. Twist.
Thank you, Madam President. This committee met on April 1st regarding the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission that the final record plan for the planned development at 44 Peters Avenue be approved. This will be the location of a U-Store store and lock storage building. The final record plan conforms to the approved general plan and the final development plan. It is a recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared accepting the final record plan of the planned development at 44 Peters Avenue in Lot 10622 as submitted, and that is respectfully submitted by Tom Kendall, John Swayzer, and myself as Chair, William Twist.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Twist. The next reports are from the Finance Committee and Chairman Mr. Kendall.
Thank you, Madam President. On April 1st, this committee met to consider increasing the authorization for repairs to the Lincoln Community Center and to authorize an application to use an additional amount of the CDBG fund balance for the increased authorization. Council authorized $120,000 for the project, funded from the city's CDBG revolving loan fund balance. The two bids received were in excess of the authorization and did not include the options of replacing the water service line and the parking lot resurfacing. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to authorize the Director of Public Service and Safety to file an amended application with the Ohio Development Services Agency, or the ODSA, of a minor modification to increase from $120,000 to $180,000 the use of City of Troy CDBG
RLF balance for improvement to Lincoln Community Center. Upon approval of the application to ODSA, authorize the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for improvements to Lincoln Community Center in an amount not to exceed $180,000. The committee supports emergency legislation so the application to ODSA can be filed without delay and the project rebid. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Swayzer, Mr. Sievert, and myself as Chair of Finance Committee.
Are there any questions from council members? You may continue, Mr. Kendall.
Okay, on April 1st, this committee also met to consider recommending an agreement between the city and the Community Improvement Corporation of Troy, Ohio, or the CIC, related to the Lincoln Community Center, LCC. Both the city and the LCC board would like to have an agreement that sets forth the responsibilities of each regarding the LCC building. A 10-year lease is proposed so that both parties can revisit it more frequently than in the past. By an agreement between the city and the CIC would take responsibility of having a lease with the LCC board. A CIC can handle leasing of municipal properties quickly and efficiently. None of the current services provided by the city to LCC would change. It is a recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into a lease with the Community Improvement Corporation of Troy, Ohio, regarding the CIC handling the lease of the Lincoln Community Center building. And this is also respectfully submitted by Mr. Swayzer, Mr. Sievert, and myself as chair.
Are there any comments or questions from council members? You may continue, Mr. Kendall.
Okay, thank you. For our last one, this committee members, Schweizer and Kendall, met on April 12th to review the only bid that was submitted for the curbside recycling program. As that bid exceeded the $400,000 per year authorization set by council in the third year of the contract. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into a contract with Rumpke of Ohio, Inc., based on Rumpke's bid amount stated below. And this too is respectfully submitted by Mr. Swayzer, Mr. Sievert, and myself as Chair of the Finance.
Any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Kendall.
Thank you.
The next report is from the Recreation and Parks Committee and Chairman Mr. Brock Heath.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. We have one item tonight. On April 11th, committee members Oda and Terwilliger met to consider an agreement related to the 2019 Troy Strawberry Festival, TSF, which will include the downtown venue, the levee, and part of the Treasure Island Park for Friday night activities. As in prior years, in the interest of preserving public safety and crowd management, some activities should be limited during the actual festival events and for an hour before and after the events of the day. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into an agreement regarding the Troy Strawberry Festival to be held within the levee area and the downtown, Market Street from Water Street to Staunton Road, closed for safety. That part of Treasure Island Park to be used for the Friday night activities and to include the limitation of some activities during and for the hour before and after each day's events activities. This is respectfully submitted by Mrs. Oda, Mr. Terwilliger, and myself as Chair of the Recreation and Parks Committee.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Heath.
Thank you, ma'am.
The next report this evening is from the Streets and Sidewalks Committee and Chairman Mr. Bobby Phillips.
Thank you, Madam President. The committee met on April 1 and recommended that the 2019 paving program be authorized at a cost not to exceed $1.18 million. Committee members Phillips and Lutz then met on April 11 to consider recommending an increase to the authorization for this project based on the additional funds Troy expects to receive during 2019 from the state's new gasoline tax. The detailed report includes the funding for elements of the program and a list of specific areas to be included. It is the recommendation of the committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2019 paving program at a cost not to exceed $1.280 million. And this is respectfully submitted by Councilman Heath, Councilman Lutz, and myself as chair.
Any comments or questions from council?
Madam President, I
Yes,
just have a
Mr.
quick
Twist.
question. I've had a couple questions on people wanting to know if their streets are expected to be paved in 2020 or 2021. Do we have an outlook on our website of past 2019? I didn't
I
see
believe
one.
we have some information out there. If they have specifics, they can certainly email us, and we will tell them what their grade was and what year we plan. I do want to caution that.
That can change.
Well, it can change. It can always change because of weather conditions and erosion of the road. But it can also change, and it may not be as early or as quick as people might want, because we keep in constant contact with our utility companies, particularly Vectren, as they go through and they replace all the gas lines. And so we will delay repairing, resurfacing, or overlaying road that might look like it needs it, because we don't want to lead a utility project, we want to follow it.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Phillips. The last report this evening is from the Utilities Committee and Chairman, Mr. John Terwilliger.
Thank you, Madam President. This committee met on April 1st to consider recommending the bidding for the Harrison and Atlantic water line replacement project be authorized. The design estimate for the project is $750,000, and approved CDBG critical infrastructure grant of $500,000 will fund the majority of the project, which is described in the details below. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into contracts for the Harrison and Atlantic Street water line replacement project at a total cost not to exceed $750,000. This is respectfully submitted by Mr. Lutz, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Terwilliger. We now open the meeting for citizen comments. At this time, does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments related to any of the agenda items this evening? If so, please come to the microphone and state your name and address. There is a 2-minute time limit at this point in the meeting, and Mr. Grant Kerber is our timekeeper.
Mrs. Baker, if I may, maybe I missed, did I hear the Community and Economic Development report read?
Yeah. You store it?
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. That was my mistake.
That's okay.
Thank you.
I'll talk louder next time.
Longer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Sorry.
back to citizen comments. Does anyone have any comments at this point in the meeting?
Dr. Connor, 1210 South Clay Street, Troy, Ohio. Now this property, the excess to be sold, is that one out there by Duke Park?
It's the house and farm buildings.
But I mean, that's the extension of Duke Park.
Right, but it's not the whole farm, yes.
Right,
it's
just the house. But
right.
I can remember when this was all going about, that was one of the selling points for the council to okay this, was the use of them barns could be for equipment and stuff. And now you want to sell the house and the barn. And that was a big selling point to this council here. We can use them barns and buildings to put all our equipment stuff in. So now it's not good enough for the equipment, or was this all part of the plan to begin with? That's one thing. The other thing is on this trash recycle pickup. Everything else is bid. How come recycling isn't bid to other recyclers? How come we only got a monopoly of one outfit here in Troy?
It was bid.
It was
and
bid?
It was bid, and we only got one response. So we can't do anything about the companies that choose not to bid. But it was put out for bid.
Yeah, but, you know, I mean, what I'm saying is, I mean, I maybe put my recycle out maybe once every 4 or 5 weeks.
Right.
And, you know, it's cost me $17 for recycling. I told Mr. Tithering, I talked to him before, over in Rensselaer, for senior citizens and the people on low income, they can buy tickets to put on their trash cans when it's full for there's $3. I would say even $5 would be a good thing here, where we're, you know, instead of $15, $17, you could get by with $5. You know, we buy them from the city. We had to put that sticker on there. When they see the sticker, they pick it up, pull the sticker off, and they go. But I mean, I'm paying for stuff that I ain't even getting use of. And I'm not probably the only senior citizen or old person in this town that feels that way.
Time.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience have any comments at this point in the meeting? We'll move on to resolutions then, and ask Mrs. Knight to read Resolution R16, 2019.
Resolution number R16, 2019. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the Harrison Street, Atlantic Street Water Line Replacement Project, cost not to exceed $750,000. First reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Phillips to adopt the resolution. Is there any further discussion from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R17, 2019.
Resolution number R17, 2019, an amended resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to file an application to the Ohio Development Services Agency, ODSA, for the use of a portion of the city's economic development revolving loan fund balance for repair work to Lincoln Community Center and declaring an emergency. This would be increasing the use of the funds to $180,000. First reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Terwilliger to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Kendall to adopt the resolution. Is there any further discussion? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R18, 2019.
Resolution number R18, 2019, resolution amending resolution number R68, 2018, authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for improvements to the Lincoln Community Center building, Troy, Ohio. The cost would not to exceed $180,000. This would be the first reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Phillips to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Twist to adopt the resolution. Is there any further discussion from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R19, 2019.
Resolution number R19, 2019, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2019 paving program. This will be at a total cost not to exceed $1,280,000. First reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda.
Yes.
Move to adopt the resolution.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Phillips to adopt the resolution. Is there any further discussion from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R20, 2019.
Resolution number R20, 2019, resolution amending resolution number R9, 2019, authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into a contract with Rumpke of Ohio, Inc. for the curbside recycling program. This will be for a 3-year contract with the option of 2 individual 1-year renewals. First reading.
Are there any questions?
Move for suspension.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Heath to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath.
Yes. I'll move to adopt that.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Terwilliger to adopt the resolution. Is there any further discussion from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
We'll move on to ordinances and ask Mrs. Knight to read ordinance 012, 2019.
Ordinance number 012, 2019, ordinance changing the zoning of in-lot 10858 in the city of Troy, Ohio, from the county zoning districts of R1 AAA, one family residential district, and A1 domestic agriculture district, to the city zoning of R4 single family residential district. This has been recommended by the Troy Planning Commission. It was the subject of a public hearing this evening. This is the second reading, and a committee meeting has been set.
All right, that committee meeting again is Monday evening at 5:30 p.m. here in council chambers. Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 013, 2019.
Ordinance number 013, 2019, ordinance accepting the final record plan of the planned development at 44 Peters Avenue in lot 10622, parcel number D08104346 for the youth storage and lock storage building. This is the first reading, has been recommended for approval by the Troy Planning Commission.
Are there any questions from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Phillips to adopt the ordinance. Is there any discussion from council?
Madam President, I just think it's important to say that the funds that are generated from here will stay at Duke Park. And I know that wasn't said at the committee meeting, or it was said at the committee meeting, but wasn't put on the record at when the committee report was read. But I know Mr. Letts worked hard on that and discussed that at the committee meeting, and I think that's important for the people in the community to know that despite us selling this property, the funds will go strictly for use in the Duke Park area.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Letts?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 014, 2019.
Ordinance number 014, 2019, ordinance declaring municipally owned real property as surplus and no longer needed for municipal purposes and authorizing the sale of such surplus property. The sale of the farmhouse and associated outbuildings at 2290 North Troy, Sydney Road has been supported by the Board of Park Commissioners. First reading.
Mr. Sievert, I think this is the property then that you were talking about, that this will stay in the...
Oh, I apologize. I thought we were on
That's
that
right.
area.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Just wanted to make
Yeah, I don't care about the you store it. The you store it is fine.
You care about it.
We care.
Yeah, but I do care about that that the funds generated from the
We
sale of this go
understand.
to Duke.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions from council?
Motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Twist and seconded by Mr. Phillips to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Letts?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second?
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Terwilliger to adopt the ordinance. Is there any further discussion from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Letts?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 015, 2019.
Ordinance number 015, 2019. Ordinance authorizing the use of public areas for the 2019 Troy Strawberry Festival and authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to enter into an agreement therefore. This is the standard legislation for the Strawberry Festival. This is the first reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Well, move to suspend the rules? Yep.
Second?
Got it.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Terwilliger to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Letts?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Twist to adopt the ordinance. Is there any further discussion from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Letts?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read the final ordinance of the evening, ordinance 016, 2019.
Ordinance number 016, 2019. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into a lease with the Community Improvement Corporation of Troy, Ohio, regarding lease of the Lincoln Community Center facility. This is the first reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Kendall to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Heath to adopt the ordinance. Is there any further discussion from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
That completes the business portion of tonight's meeting. Mrs. Knight, are there any communications or announcements?
No, they're not.
Mayor Beamish, do you have any comments for us this evening?
Well, thank you, Madam President. Just about three things. One, I apologize for my tardiness today, but I was attending a DARE graduation at St. Patrick's, and it went a little longer, so I did get here. Second thing is just a reminder that this Friday will be the Riverway Summit. I say that because that's a regional event, but held at the Troy Hobart Arena. Over 40 vendors, and we have a keynote speaker coming from the Colorado Tourism to talk about the powers of river and how they can enhance our economic development efforts. It will be starting at 8 o'clock, go till 1 o'clock-ish in the afternoon. So if you're still interested in coming, we're close by. And it should be a good time. Troy Foundation, again, I want to make sure everybody understands, is our signature sponsor. They see the power of what we're trying to accomplish. So I thought I'd say that. And the final thing, actually, at the April 1st council meeting, I think President Pro Tem was presiding and asked us to look at a proposed purchase with the personal thermal imaging cameras. Now, those are the personal. That doesn't replace the four that we that are a little more Cadillac, the large version cameras. These are more personal for an individual firefighter. So I did investigate that, and I spoke to Chief Simmons and I spoke to Patrick Titterington about what that may be, and as they're the priority, the need. This is one of those extra layers of protection we always want to have for safety of our firefighters and for residents as well, to be able to get in there and still have an opportunity to use that technology. It's new technology. It's portable, which makes it more accessible. And so I have, after looking at that and investigating, I thank you for bringing that up. And after consultation with the chief and Patrick, I authorized the purchase of 8 of those portable units. And in talking with the chief, that should be sufficient to allow us that extra layer of safety. So just want everybody to be up to date on. I thought that was a good safety request.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Titterington, do you have any comments this evening?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several, and really they address some of the public comments that we've had earlier this evening. The first one, to answer the question that was not answered earlier regarding the Hills Camp property and the farmhouse. Council members who were here in 2015 when we exercised the option and purchased the property, remember that we paid a premium for that property because it abuts Duke Park, because location is everything. The council felt it was important to purchase 150 acres worth, plus or minus. At the time, you'll recall, the $1.5 million price tag was being offset by several grants or outside funding. 2 of those grants, I kind of left this up in the air in the committee meeting. Two of those grants totaled $600,000 between the Duke Foundation and the Robinson Foundation. Staff did the research and found that the Miami County Park District paid us approximately $288,000 to purchase 40 acres along the floodway and the banks of the near the Great Miami River so that they could keep it in a conservation easement. They did use, they were awarded an Ohio Department of Natural Resources grant to offset that cost. So that did not come from the Park District, but through the state. So approximately $888,500 of the $1,500 was in fact paid for by outside sources. That's approximately 60% of the total cost. At the time, we did discuss the farm property, as Mr. Phillips pointed out at the committee meeting. The discussion was that if we could use that property for park maintenance purposes, that we would certainly want to do that and save the costs of building a new building to relocate from the Hobart Arena over to Duke Park. Park staff, the park board representatives assessed that property very carefully and found that between the house and the outbuildings, that would not serve their purpose. And so as another funding offset, we did have it appraised, and tonight you authorized us to go out to bid to sell that property. If the minimum bid of $250,000 is met, then 75% of the $1.5 million cost of buying that property would have been paid for by non-general fund sources. So wanted to clarify that first of all. Second of all, the recycling program. As the council probably knows from their in-depth reading of the codified ordinances, it is required that all residential properties participate in the recycling program. To that end, and per state law, we do every so often, in this case 5 years hence, bid that out competitively. We did offer it for bid, advertised in several different ways, reached out to all of the potential contractors that we know of that do recycling, and there are not that many in this area. After that, the only one that submitted a sealed bid by the deadline, actually it didn't matter, it was only one bid overall, and that was Rumpke. They are the ones that submitted the bid, and we are going to award that bid based on the action tonight. I bring that up just to make sure that people know that, number one, the competitive bidding is required, and we do take it seriously, and we do try to reach out to as many contractors, all the contractors that we know of, to encourage the competition. And we cannot control when there is a minimal number of bidders down to one. I will say something that was mentioned at the committee meeting and in the report to council. We did do an analysis of what it would cost us to start our own recycling program. So roughly speaking, in the next 5 years, the recycling contract with Rumpke will cost $2 million. By comparison, for us to purchase the trucks, purchase 9,000 toters, hire 2 additional employees to drive the trucks, and maintain the equipment would cost us $3.2 million of general fund money. So we do analyze, we do compare, and we do try to recommend the cheapest alternative that we can. The third thing is talking about jobs. Jobs keeps coming up, and one of the comments that I want to address is Just to paraphrase, the ConAgra project, which is a $70 million project, it seemed that there seemed to be the implication that those jobs were, again, I'm paraphrasing, second rate or throwaway jobs. It may not have been the intention, but when we're talking about 100 to 150 jobs, manufacturing jobs with a quality organization that has chosen not only to reside within the city, but also grow several times in the last 12 years, it's important to celebrate the expansion that they're doing. As anyone who is familiar with economic development knows, the main ways that jobs are grown in a community is through expansions of existing companies within the community. We have been very successful at that, and we hope to continue that streak. ConAgra is one. Kettering Health Network, that's not an expansion, but a new project that is another 100 to 150 jobs. In addition, according to the Troy Development Council, we have, and it fluctuates anywhere from 400 to 800 jobs that are vacant in this community. Jobs that are here, that are unfilled, that need to be filled, and we don't have any people to fill them. Those are manufacturing, technical, welding, professional services type jobs, anywhere from $40,000 a year jobs and upwards. So right there, that's anywhere from 800 to 900 jobs that need to be filled, and through our attraction, residential, and other economic development, quality of life investments, we are trying to fill those jobs as part of our overall economic development strategy. I believe I've taken enough time. That's all I have. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, your time's up.
My time is up.
Yeah. City Auditor, Mr. Frigge.
I don't have anything tonight.
I think I took John's time.
Director of Law, Mr. Kerber.
I don't have anything this evening, thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to remind everyone that Meet the Candidate Forum is on Wednesday, April 17th at 7:30 p.m. at Troy Junior High School cafeteria. It's free, it's open to the public, and we have a couple of races here in the city that are pretty important. The one is the mayor's position, and the other one is the 6th Ward council seat. So just letting you know that, and welcome all of you to the forum. Are there any comments from council members this evening?
Madam President.
Yes, Mr.
I just had a
Twist.
comment. I wanted to thank Jeremy Drake and the Parks Department on getting the baseball fields ready around town as we get ready for the little ones to play. And just ask that people slow down as they go through those neighborhoods that have ball fields, as you'll have a lot of little kids practicing. But I wanted to thank Jeremy. I know there's a lot of work to get those ready.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? Mr.
If I may.
Phillips?
Thank you. I thought the auditor would talk about the Auditor of State's report that came back on our short little audit of our OPERS personnel. It was an outstanding audit. It was perfect, and everything as per usual. So thank you and your staff for all the work you did with that. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Heath?
Yes, ma'am. Just want to express the excitement again that we were able to partner up with the Strawberry Festival for 2019. It's an amazing event. Obviously, a lot of us, I've heard sometimes the local, we stay away because of the traffic, but it is a great thing to have in the community. Obviously, heard estimates of 150,000 people come into town that weekend. The economic development is massive for that. And really, people know us by that. In my travels for business and going different places, when I speak to people and I tell them I'm from Troy, I always hear, they come up and say, hey, that's the Strawberry Festival place, right? And even all the way down into Peru in South America. My wife is from there, and she had a friend from there that had done some travels. And when she heard she was moving here, boy, almost 2 decades ago now, that was one of the first things she said, is that we're going to enjoy the strawberries. So continue to support the Strawberry Festival. I think Kathy Roeder's in the audience back there somewhere. I'm glad that we can do it.
Thank you. Anyone else on council have any comments? Is there any comments from city staff this evening? Any comments or questions from anyone in the audience?
How you doing? Bill Emmerich, 1137 Westridge Drive. Just leaves. I don't want to make this a big issue. I put mine out. They never got picked up. I contacted one of the people who asked questions. They said they don't get picked up in the spring. They only get picked up in the fall. Leaves sometimes wait a long time to fall down, and they fall down after we're past the time to put leaves out. And so when I do spring cleaning and I clean around my house, there's a lot of leaves in my neighborhood, and so I take them, I put them out on the street, and 9 times out of 10, they've always been gone, whether the wind blew them or somebody picked them up, they've been gone. But this time, somebody stopped by and said we had to move them. And when they say I have to move them, they're talking about I have to move mine, I have to move my 80-year-old neighbors, I have to move the ladies across the street because she's 78, and they can't do it, so I'm doing all their work, so I put it out in the street. They don't have trucks, they can't get rid of it. I would never ask anybody to pay $1.25 for a bag if we already pay taxes. So I just think that we should try to designate some weekends in the spring as a dedicated time in which we could have a pickup would not only include leaves, but branches and bushes die, and just make a big day out of it 1 or 2 times in the springtime, whether that's in March, end of March, or sometime in April. I'd appreciate it if someone picked that banner up and took a look at that. It would serve everybody in the city. Everybody would be included. Everybody see everybody out there working. Because if my property's clean and my neighbor's property's clean, then the city of Troy is cleaned up. And that's all we're trying to do. All right, thank you, Carmen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Titterington, I saw that you were making note of that, so thank you. Anyone else in the audience have any comments? Thank you all for attending tonight's meeting. We have an executive session.
Right. Madam President, I'd like to make the motion that we recess into executive session.
Second.
For the purpose of...
Okay, for the purpose of, there's 2 items. First is the discussion of preparing for conducting or reviewing negotiations or bargaining session with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment. And second, conferring with an attorney for the public body concerning disputes involving the public body that are the subject of pending or imminent court action.
I'll still second that.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Phillips to recess into executive session. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Motion is passed.
We will be back in a little bit. It's up to you whether you stay or not, but it may be a little bit, and I thank you all for attending tonight's meeting, and have a happy Easter if you choose not to stay. So thank you.
Madam President, I'd like to make a motion that we go back in council session.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Phillips to return to regular session. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
And Mrs. Oda is absent.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.